The lake shimmered under a lazy morning sun, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. Pine trees lined the gravel road like solemn sentinels as I pulled my truck into the long-abandoned driveway. After 8 years of service and 2 surgeries, I was finally home, or at least what was left of it. Grandpa's cabin was smaller than I remembered, gray cedar walls, moss on the shingles, and a bent weather vane still clinging to the roof like a war medal. It needed work. So did I. I stepped out, breathing in the scent of wet pine and riverstone. The world was finally quiet. No sirens, no orders, just the whisper of wind and the hum of crickets. I hadn't felt peace like this in years, but peace doesn't last long around people who fear what they don't understand. She arrived just as I started unloading lumber from the back. Blonde bob, blazer too formal for the woods, heels stabbing into the gravel like she was punishing it, clipboard in hand, lips tight, eyes calculating. "Excuse me." Her voice was sharp, slicing through the calm like broken glass. "Can I help you?" I glanced over my shoulder. "No ma'am, I'm all good." She didn't move. "This is a private community, not this part," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "This is my land. Been in my family since 1946. She narrowed her eyes like she was scanning me. "For Li's name Marcus Lane." She flipped through papers like she was hunting a warrant. "There's no Marcus Lane in our registry. That's because I'm not in your H." She blinked once, twice, her lips curled like she'd just tasted vinegar. "Everyone around this lake is under Willow Shores Homeowners Association jurisdiction. That includes building codes, occupancy, approval, and the standards." I chuckled softly. "Good thing I'm not around the lake. I'm on it. And this cabin, it's grandfathered out of your HOA boundaries. Always has been." She stepped closer, posture stiff. "I'm Marlene Godfrey, president of Willow Shores HOA. We expect a certain standard here, and we don't take kindly 2 strangers showing up unannounced." There it was, the shift in tone, the sharp glance, the unspoken insult. "Strangers like me," I said flatly. She didn't deny it. "Let me be very clear, Mr. Lane," she continued. "This is a peaceful, respectable community. If you think you're going to disrupt it with barking dogs, beer cans, and muddy boots," "Ma'am," I interrupted. "The only boots I own have walked across Kandahar and Fallujah. And if you're worried about peace, maybe don't threaten a combat vet on his own front porch." For a second, just one, something in her expression shifted: surprise, maybe even fear. But then it vanished behind her mask of authority. "This isn't about you," she snapped. "It's about preserving the value of this neighborhood. Then, maybe worry about your own yard." She pulled out her phone. "If you refuse to leave, I'm calling the sheriff." I smiled, steady and unblinking. "Tell him Marcus says hi. We grew up fishing on this lake." Her thumb froze mid-dial. She turned sharply and walked off, heels cracking like gunfire down the gravel path. By the time the patrol car rolled up an hour later, I had finished unloading. Deputy McCoy stepped out, his gray mustache twitching in amusement. "You really stirred up the hornet's nest, huh?" "She came onto my land," he nodded. "Technically, she's got no jurisdiction here, but you might want to brace yourself. Marlene doesn't give up easy." That evening, as I sat on the porch eating a cold sandwich, a fresh notice fluttered against my door. "Unapproved residence construction in violation of Willow Shores Ordinance 7C. No signature, just a typed name, President Marlene Godfrey. A war had started, not with bullets or bombs but with rules, letters and gossip. I finished my sandwich and looked out over the lake. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just picked a fight on the wrong patch of dirt with the wrong man. Over the next week, Marlene made good on her silent promise. If she couldn't push me out legally, she'd try to make life unbearable. It started subtly. 3 days after our first encounter, I came back from the hardware store to find my mailbox ripped out of the ground, bent like a straw. A yellow notice flapped from the porch railing. "Unauthorized modifications to visible exterior violation, #003." A day later, I noticed a group of HOA board members, 3 retirees with clipboards and scowls, pacing the road just beyond my property, lying, murmuring to one another and snapping photos. My dog, Bishop, barked at them from the porch. One of the men, older man with a sun visor and a wrinkled neck, raised his voice. "You better leash that mutt, or we'll have him reported." As a threat, Bishop hadn't left the steps, but that didn't matter. They were building a casor, at least the illusion of one. Then came the garbage complaint. I woke up to 2 black trash bags dumped at the end of my drive, torn open, rotting food strewn across the gravel. A printed letter had been taped to the gate. "Violation number 006, improper waste disposal attracting wildlife." Marlene was orchestrating all of it like a conductor, cueing her instruments of passive aggression and procedural abuse. She hadn't set foot on my land again, but her presence was constant. Paper notices, false reports, and anonymous complaints funneled through the HOA board like clockwork. I remained calm, documenting everything with photos and dated logs. That military discipline served me well. Never react emotionally, always stay one move ahead. Still, it wore on me. The peace I'd come here for was now poisoned by pettiness. One evening, as the sky faded into lavender, a letter arrived that almost made me laugh. It accused me of violating Willow Shore's Community Regulation 5B, excessive patriotism. Apparently, my US flag folded and flying from the same pole Grandpa had installed decades ago was now visually disruptive. That was the moment I knew Marlene's issue wasn't with my cabin, my dog, or my firewood. It was with me, not what I was doing, but who I was. A man she didn't recognize. A man who didn't bend when told to. A man who didn't belong in her version of what the lake should look like. That night, I made a choice. I drove into town and paid a visit to Luther Daniels, the county's retired land surveyor, and the same man who had mapped out Grandpa's original property lines. We hadn't spoken since Grandpa's funeral, but he greeted me with a warm handshake and a worn binder that looked older than me. "Still dealing with the HOA queen?" he asked, flipping through the map pages. "You heard," he snorted. "Everyone hears about Marlene eventually. She's turned more peaceful veterans into enemies than the VA." For the next hour we pored over land records. My cabin wasn't just outside the HOA, it was wrapped in a strange patch of property they had quietly been using for years without renewing the right-of-way, access trails, their boat ramp, even a scenic garden path of it snaked through my family's land. "See this easement agreement," Luther said, tapping a faded document. "Your grandfather gave them access back in '89, but it expired in 2019. They were supposed to renegotiate the terms and they never did." He shook his head. "Nope, legally you could shut it all down." I leaned back in my chair, that weariness in my chest. It turned into something sharper. Resolved. Marlene thought she held all the cards because she controlled the board, the meetings, the language of rules and violations, but she had no idea the ground she stood on literally belonged to me. "I'm gonna need copies of everything," I said. Luther grinned. "You going to war?" "Not war," I said. "I'm just reclaiming what's mine." As I left his office, the air felt clearer. The lake wasn't just home now. It was the battlefield. That Marlene had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was just some drifter with a dog and a hammer. She never asked what I'd done before coming here. She never imagined that behind the quiet porch and the worn boots was a man trained to wait, to prepare, and to strike with precision. And I had just found her blind spot. 2 days later, I posted the first sign. "Private property. No trespassing and trespassers will be prosecuted." It stood right where the HOA scenic walking path curved around the edge of my woods and into their boat launch area. I watched from the porch as 3 ladies in tennis visors stopped in their tracks. One pulled out her phone. Another turned back toward the neighborhood like she'd seen a ghost. By nightfall, Marlene had left a voicemail. Her tone wasn't angry. Not yet. It was brittle, rehearsed. "Greater than Mr. Lane, we've been reviewing your claims, and we believe you may be misinterpreting the boundaries of community-managed land. I suggest we discuss this rationally before escalating the matter unnecessarily." I didn't call back. Instead, I mailed the HOA a registered packet containing copies of the expired easement, maps, photos of the trespassing trails, and a formal notice. All HOA use of my land must cease within 30 days. No exceptions. That was the shot across the bow. Within hours, retaliation began. The next morning, a county code enforcement officer appeared on my driveway, flanked by 2 men in polo shirts, who looked suspiciously like Marlene's board members. They cited a list of alleged violations: unauthorized fencing, unpermitted electrical work, and a supposed non-compliant dwelling structure. The officer, a younger guy named Reyes, looked uncomfortable the whole time. I showed him my deed, permits, even the letter from Luther. His face went pale when he saw the property maps. "Sorry," he muttered, handing back the documents. "Didn't realize they were building through your land. You're clean here." As Reyes left, one of the HOA men muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." I smiled. "No, it's just getting good." Later that week, I installed 2 game cameras facing the trail. They caught everything: HOA members using the path after dark, kids sneaking through the woods, even Marlene herself trespassing in heels, inspecting the property line like she was planning an invasion. I printed the photos, mailed another packet, this time with a legal threat attached. The next Saturday, a new kind of message arrived. Around 6 a.m. I stepped outside to find Bishop growling low at the edge of the porch. There, driven into the dirt, was a handmade sign scrawled in red paint. "Leave, you're not wanted here." Cowardly, childish, but it told me something useful. I was getting under Marlene's skin. I contacted Jade, a friend from my military days who had transitioned into property law. We'd served together in Iraq. Now, she was an attorney with a reputation for making small-town tyrants sweat. She reviewed everything. "You've got them by the throat," she said. "The expired easement, the harassment, the false reports, it's all admissible. If they keep pushing, we countersue." "I don't want money," I told her. "I want the harassment to stop." She smiled. "Sometimes the best way to make them stop is to make them pay first." While Jade drafted the CS desist letter and outlined a potential civil suit, I turned my attention to the most symbolic piece of land, the shared dock. The HOA had been using it freely for years, mooring their kayaks, fishing, holding summer wine nights on the lower deck. All of it stood on my side of the old boundary, that's so I built a fence, 8 feet tall, steel posts, barbed wire topping the gate, a heavy-duty padlock. On it hung a sign, HOA access terminated, property under new enforcement. It was functional, legal, and impossible to ignore. The next HOA meeting was reportedly chaos. Marlene had tried to paint me as an aggressor, a threat to the neighborhood's tranquility. But the residents, many of whom now realized they'd been using my land without legal access, began to murmur. Rumors spread. Questions rose. Why hadn't she renewed the easement? Why was she provoking a landowner they had no authority over? By the end of that week, I heard from 2 HOA members privately. They apologized, said they had no idea. One even asked if there was any way to de-escalate things. I told them the truth. I wasn't interested in war, but I wouldn't back down from one either. The real shift came when the sheriff paid me a personal visit, not to threaten but to warn. I'm just giving you a heads up, he said. Marlene's talking about hiring a private security firm. Says you're a danger to the community. I raised an eyebrow. She want a shootout. He laughed. I think she just wants to scare you, but people like her don't scare veterans. They irritate them. Exactly. Marlene thought this was over. Land she still didn't understand. It was about principle. This Sanders' letter landed on Marlene's desk like a grenade. Drafted with surgical precision by Jade, it cited trespassing, harassment, misuse of community funds, defamation, and illegal property access. Attached were the photos, maps, time-stamped notices, and a tally of projected damages if a civil suit moved forward. Within days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Word spread quickly. Marlene's reign was under scrutiny not by me, but by her own neighbors. The same people who once nodded at her rules were now questioning them. How had she let the easement expire? Why hadn't she disclosed the property line conflict? And, most damning of all, why had she escalated it into a legal battle they couldn't win? I wasn't at the meeting, but I heard about it. They said she tried to hold her ground, declaring I was a dangerous outsider who threatened their lifestyle. Someone, an older widow named Mrs. Vaughn, stood up and asked, "What lifestyle?" Exactly. Following made-up rules and picking fights with war veterans. The room went silent. 2 weeks later, a formal HOA letter arrived. Marlene had been removed as president. Her replacement, a soft-spoken man named Leonard Wells, requested a sit-down. We met at a neutral spot, the edge of my dock, the fence still standing behind us like a battle-worn monument. Leonard came alone. No clipboard, no posturing. "I want to apologize," he said. "You've been treated unfairly." I studied his face. He meant it. "I'm not against the community," I said. "Just against being bullied off my own land." Leonard nodded. "I've read the easement records. You're in the right. We'd like to make it right." They offered a new easement agreement, short-term, properly paid, with no access to my cabin area. I negotiated for a higher fee, a contribution to a local veterans group, and an apology letter signed by every board member who had supported Marlene's campaign against me. They agreed to all of it. The apology letter arrived printed on thick stock, signed by 12 people. It wasn't much, but it was something. The HOA cut a check for the new easement, sent another one to the Veterans Foundation, and promised in writing that no further contact would be made without legal purpose. Marlene, she sold her house, packed up her manicured life, and left the lake she tried to dominate. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just a moving truck at dawn and a "for sale" sign that stood crooked until the new owners moved in months later. Peace returned slowly. Birdsong replaced whispered gossip. The wind off the lake stopped carrying tension. Neighbors started waving against him out of guilt, some from relief. A few even invited me to community events, though I politely declined. I didn't need a committee or welcome basket to belong here. The cabin was restored by summer's end. Porch sanded, roof replaced, dock reinforced, and on the trail once lined by trespassers, I installed a single wooden bench overlooking the lake. On it, a small bronze plaque, in honor of John Lane, who knew this land before paper ever claimed it. My grandfather would have laughed at all the fuss. He never trusted bureaucracy, especially the kind wrapped in smiley newsletters and fine print. As for Bishop, he still patrols the porch, loyal as ever. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd backed down, if I'd sold the land or bent the knee just to avoid the noise. That's what bullies like Marlene count on, people giving up when the pressure mounts. But I didn't serve overseas to come home and lose the ground my family built. I didn't survive war just to surrender to a neighborhood president with a nameplate and a power complex. And in the end, all it took was truth, patience, and the kind of quiet resolve no HOA meeting can ever legislate. So when the lake goes still, in the evening, and the sun slips beneath the trees, I sit on the bench and smile, not because I won, but because I stayed, and that made all the difference.